The origin of the famous phrase, "Russians don't surrender," is linked to the events of World War I, specifically to the battle that took place early in the morning of August 6, 1915, at the Osovets fortress. On this day, German forces besieging the Russian fortress initiated a gas attack, releasing chlorine and bromine from hundreds of canisters onto the defenders of the stronghold. Soon after, a barrage of artillery fire followed the gas attack. According to the calculations of the German commanders, very few Russian soldiers were expected to survive such an assault. However, something incredible happened that day. The dead rose. Today, we will answer the main question: what really happened? The small Russian fortress of Osovets was an important defensive point on the western borders of the Russian Empire. It was situated on the Bobra River, west of the city of Białystok, and built 23 kilometers from the border with East Prussia. The fortress was intended to defend a strategic corridor, blocking the railway and highway routes to Białystok. During the First World War, according to the plans of the Russian General Staff, the fortress was supposed to defend the crossing over the Bobra River and the transportation hub of Białystok from German forces. Capturing this hub would open the way to Brest, Grodno, Minsk, and further into Russia. The first attempts to storm Osovets were made by German forces in September 1914. At that time, 40 battalions attempted to take the fortress by storm, but the attempt failed, and both sides resorted to trench warfare. Later, powerful siege artillery, including 4 famous Big Berthas, siege guns with a caliber of 420 millimeters, whose 800-kilogram shells penetrated 2-meter-thick steel and concrete structures, were brought here. After thorough preparation, on February 25, 1915, the Germans opened devastating fire from siege guns and once again launched an assault on the fortress. For several days, despite fierce attacks and artillery bombardments, Russian units held their defense and did not surrender the fortress. Having expended a huge number of shells, the Germans returned to positional warfare, which continued until midsummer. In July, the German army began a large-scale offensive, with the final capture of the still unconquered Osovets as one of its objectives. 14 infantry battalions, several dozen heavy siege guns, and 30 batteries armed with poison gas, a mixture of chlorine and bromine, were concentrated here. It is worth noting that this was the first successful mass use of chemical agents in history. On August 6, 1915, taking advantage of the prevailing wind, the Germans deployed their secret weapon. At dawn, at 4 o'clock in the morning, a dark green mist drifted onto the Russian positions. This day became black for the defenders of Osovets. The gas penetrated to a depth of up to 20 kilometers, maintaining its harmful effects at distances of up to 12 kilometers and heights of up to 12 meters. In the absence of effective protective measures, the result of the gas attack was devastating. The 9th, 10th, and 11th companies of the Zemlyansky Regiment were completely incapacitated, with only about 40 men remaining in the 12th Company and about 60 men in 3 other companies. Almost the entire 1st and 2nd lines of defense of the Sostin position were left unprotected. The fortress artillery also suffered heavy losses. Over 1,600 men were incapacitated. Overall, the entire garrison suffered varying degrees of poisoning. After the gas attack, German artillery opened heavy fire on the fortress, including shells containing phosgene. Then, 14 German battalions moved to occupy the devastated positions. Suppressing isolated resistance, they quickly breached the 1st and 2nd lines of barbed wire, seized the tactically important fortified position of the Leonov courtyard, and continued their advance. According to the calculations of German commanders, few Russians were expected to survive such a strike, and they did not anticipate any resistance. However, the Germans advanced too quickly, and their forward units were caught in their own gases. Taking advantage of the enemy's delay, the remnants of the Russian artillery and the 12th Company at the central redoubt managed to open fire on the enemy. At this moment, the fortress commandant, Lieutenant General Nikolai Brzozowski, ordered a bayonet counterattack with whatever forces were available. Following the order, the dying Russian infantrymen rose to meet the advancing Germans. As described by the journalist Vladimir Voronov, they looked like risen from graves, their faces wrapped in rags, trembling from dreadful coughing, literally spitting out pieces of lungs onto blood-stained tunics. I cannot describe the fury and rage with which our soldiers went after the German poisoners. Even the heavy rifle and machine gun fire couldn't stop the onslaught of enraged warriors. Exhausted and poisoned, they ran with a single purpose: to crush the enemy. No one lagged behind, no one needed urging. There were no individual heroes here. The soldiers marched as one, animated by a single thought: to perish, but to avenge the vile poisoners, wrote the newspaper Russian Word, based on the accounts of one of the eyewitnesses after the battle. These were the remnants of the 8th and 13th Companies of the 226th Zemlyansky Infantry Regiment, just over 60 men. Their counterattack was led by 2nd Lieutenant Vladimir Karpovich Kotlinsky. According to the surviving testimonies of participants in those events, the sight of the Russian soldiers counterattacking was so terrifying that they instilled indescribable horror in the enemy. Upon seeing the living dead advancing along the railway, the German infantrymen from the 18th Regiment, not prepared for combat, fled backward, trampling each other and hanging on barbed wire fences. Lieutenant Vladimir Karpovich Kotlinsky, who led the attack, perished during the assault. At the same time, reinforcements arrived and relieved the central redoubt, driving the enemy back to their original positions. By 8 o'clock in the morning, all the consequences of the German breakthrough had been eliminated, and by 11 o'clock, the bombardment of the fortress ceased, marking the formal end of the failed assault. Lieutenant Vladimir Karpovich Kotlinsky, an officer of the Corps of Military Topographers who led the attack, was posthumously awarded the Order of St. George, 4th class. Later, his remains were taken by his mother and reburied in his homeland in Pskov. Soon after, Russian forces were forced to abandon Osovets, as the fortress was threatened with encirclement following the capture of Kovno and Novogorgievsk by the German army. The Russians destroyed much of the fortress, and on August 18, 1915, they retreated. Thank you, dear friends, for joining me on this fascinating journey through history. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new videos about exciting events and facts from the past. Also, leave your comments below this video. I'm always happy to hear your thoughts, suggestions, and requests for topics for future videos. See you all again on the channel.